The execution order was already signed when Victor saw her face on the screen, those same eyes he'd lost 23 years ago. The traitor he condemned to die at dawn was his own daughter. Welcome back, my amazing family and friends. If you're ready to dive into this unforgettable story, hit that subscribe button and drop a comment telling me where you're watching from. Tomorrow, I'll bring you another incredible tale you absolutely can't miss. Let's get started, and don't forget to like and share to help our community grow. The winter of 2045 had turned Washington, D.C. into a fortress of steel and surveillance. Victor Kane stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows of his penthouse office in the Capitol Security Tower, watching drones patrol the gray sky like mechanical vultures. His reflection stared back, a man of 52 with silver threading through dark blonde hair, sharp blue eyes that had forgotten how to soften, and a jaw perpetually clenched against regret. He was the Director of National Integrity, a position that sounded noble but translated to something far darker. He decided who lived and who died in the name of national security. The coffee in his hand had gone cold an hour ago, but Victor didn't notice. He was reviewing files, always reviewing files. Each manila folder contained a life, an accusation, a recommendation. His pen moved with mechanical precision, signing approvals for interrogations, detentions, and occasionally, executions. He'd learned to disconnect the signatures from their consequences. It was the only way to survive in this position. Another stack, sir. His assistant, a nervous young man named Peters, placed 3 more folders on the mahogany desk. Victor didn't look up. Summary. 2 suspected information traffickers. 1 confirmed rebel operative. The last one's flagged as high priority. She was caught trying to smuggle classified documents to the resistance. Intelligence believes she's connected to the Eastern Bloc cell. Recommended action. Execution. All 3. Victor's pen hovered over the first file. He'd signed 43 execution orders this month alone. What were 3 more? He opened the first folder mechanically, scanned the details. A man, 37, caught with encrypted communications, and signed. The second, a woman, 52, repeat offender, signed. The third folder felt heavier somehow, though that was impossible. Weight was just paper and ink. Subject, Nadia Okafor. Age, 23. Charges, high treason, espionage, conspiracy against the state. Recommendation, immediate execution. Victor's eyes skimmed the photograph clipped to the file. A young black woman with sharp cheekbones, defiant dark eyes, and hair cropped close to her skull. There was something in her expression, not fear, but fury. It reminded him of someone, though he couldn't place who. He signed without reading further. The pen made a scratching sound that seemed louder than usual. Process these by end of day, Victor said, closing the folder. Peters gathered the files and hesitated at the door. Sir, about the Okafor case. What about it? She's requesting an audience. Says she has information that could. They all say that, Peters. They all have information when they're facing the chair. Victor turned back to the window. Denied. Execute the order as scheduled. The door closed with a soft click. Victor had perfected the art of not feeling. It was a survival mechanism he developed years ago, after losing everything that mattered. The memory tried to surface: a small apartment in Baltimore, his wife Maria's laugh, a nursery painted yellow, but he pushed it down like he always did. That life had ended 23 years ago when his wife was murdered and his 6-month-old daughter, Isabella, was kidnapped during the civil unrest that preceded the regime's rise to power. The case had gone cold. The world had moved on. Victor had learned to move on too, or at least pretend to. He'd channeled his rage into purpose, rising through the ranks of the new government security apparatus. If he couldn't save his own family, he'd save the nation. That's what he told himself every time he signed another order, another sanction, another death warrant. His phone buzzed. A message from General Whitmore. Tribunal observation tonight. 2,000 hours. Your presence required. Victor typed back. Confirmed. The tribunals were public spectacles designed to remind citizens what happened to traitors. Victor attended out of duty, sitting stone-faced in the observation booth while prisoners were paraded before judges who'd already decided their fates. It was theater, brutal and necessary. Or so he'd convinced himself. That evening, Victor stood in the observation booth overlooking Tribunal Chamber 7. The room below was sterile, white walls, harsh lighting, a single chair bolted to the floor where the accused sat shackled. Nadia Okafor was brought in by 2 guards, her orange prison uniform hanging loose on her thin frame. She walked with her head high, despite the chains. Something about her bearing made Victor lean closer to the glass. The tribunal judge, a severe woman named Justice Holloway, read the charges in a monotone voice. Nadia Okafor, you stand accused of high treason against the unified states, conspiracy to aid enemy forces, and possession of classified intelligence with intent to distribute. How do you plead? Nadia's voice carried clearly through the speakers. I plead human. A murmur rippled through the room. Justice Holloway's expression didn't change. The court recognizes only 2 pleas, guilty or not guilty. Then I plead guilty to being human in an inhuman system. Victor felt something crack in his chest, a hairline fracture in the armor he'd spent decades building. This woman wasn't begging or cowering. She was staring down her own death with a clarity that unnerved him. The evidence is overwhelming, Justice Holloway continued. You were apprehended with documents containing state secrets. You have admitted to working with resistance cells. The tribunal finds you guilty on all charges. Sentencing will proceed. I request to address the director, Nadia interrupted. Justice Holloway frowned. That's not protocol. I have information about a crime committed 23 years ago. A kidnapping. A child taken from Baltimore during the May riots. Nadia's eyes seemed to find the observation glass, as if she could see through it directly to Victor. Tell Director Kane I know what happened to Isabella Kane. Victor's blood turned to ice. The room spun. That name, his daughter's name, hadn't been spoken aloud in his presence in over 2 decades. It was sealed in classified files, buried beneath layers of security protocols. How do you know that name? Victor's voice came through the speaker system before he realized he'd pressed the intercom button. Nadia's lips curved into something that wasn't quite a smile. Because I am Isabella Kane. And you just signed my execution order, Father. The word father detonated in Victor's mind like a bomb. The tribunal chamber erupted into chaos. Guards shouted, Justice Holloway demanded order, but Victor couldn't hear any of it through the roaring in his ears. He stared at the woman below, at Nadia Okafor, at someone claiming to be his daughter. It was impossible. Isabella had been 6 months old when she was taken. She'd had wispy dark hair and Maria's brown eyes, but she'd been a baby. This woman was a stranger. And yet. Victor's hands trembled as he gripped the railing. There was something in the shape of her face, the defiant tilt of her chin. Maria used to stand like that when she was arguing a point she believed in. Pause the proceedings, Victor said into the intercom. His voice sounded strange, distant. I'm coming down. General Whitmore appeared at his side. Victor, this is clearly a manipulation tactic. Prisoners will say anything. I said pause the proceedings. Victor left the booth and descended the stairs to the chamber floor. His security detail flanked him, hands on their weapons. The room had gone silent. Everyone watched as the Director of National Integrity approached the accused. Up close, Nadia, Isabella, whoever she was, looked even younger. There were scars on her knuckles, a thin line across her left eyebrow. Her eyes were brown, deep and dark, just like Maria's. Prove it, Victor said. His voice was barely above a whisper. Nadia met his gaze without flinching. You kept a music box in the nursery. It played Brahms' lullaby. Your wife Maria used to wind it every night before putting me to sleep. The last time she wound it was May 12, 2022, 2 hours before she died. Victor's knees nearly buckled. No one knew about the music box. It had been destroyed in the attack. You could have read that in a file, he managed. You have a birthmark, Nadia continued. Shaped like a crescent moon on your left shoulder blade. Maria used to trace it with her finger and call it your kiss from the universe. She said everyone who loved you would carry their own moon to match yours. Victor's hand moved unconsciously to his shoulder. The birthmark was there, hidden beneath his suit. It wasn't in any file. It wasn't anywhere except in his most private memories. On the night of the attack, Nadia's voice softened. Maria hid me in a ventilation shaft in the ceiling. She covered my mouth to keep me quiet. I was crying, I was always crying, you told her, but that night she sang to me. She sang Blackbird by the Beatles. She only got through the first verse before they broke down the door. The room tilted. Victor had to place a hand on the chair to steady himself. He'd never told anyone about Maria's singing. It had been their private ritual. When they took me, Nadia whispered, I was still wearing the Odyssey Maria had dressed me in that morning. White, with little yellow ducks. You'd bought it the week before because it made her laugh. She said you had terrible taste in baby clothes. A sound escaped Victor's throat, something between a gasp and a sob. He remembered that Odyssey. He remembered Maria laughing. He remembered everything he'd tried so hard to forget. How? His voice broke. How are you alive? That, Nadia said, is a longer story. But you need to hear it before you kill me. Victor looked up at Justice Holloway, at General Whitmore watching from the booth, at the guards surrounding them. He'd built his entire life on control, on order, on following protocols that kept the chaos at bay. But standing before him was the one thing he'd never controlled, the past he'd tried to bury. Clear the room, Victor ordered. Sir, that's not, a guard began. Clear the room. They filed out slowly, reluctantly. Justice Holloway protested, but General Whitmore ushered her away. Within minutes, Victor and Nadia were alone in the White Chamber, with only the surveillance cameras as witnesses. Victor pulled up a chair and sat across from her, his legs no longer trustworthy. Tell me everything. What would you do if you discovered you'd unknowingly sentenced your own child to death? Share your thoughts below. I read every comment. Nadia flexed her fingers against the cold metal of the shackles, the chains clinking softly in the oppressive silence. Victor watched every micro-expression cross her face, the way her jaw tightened, how her eyes flickered to the cameras in the corners before settling back on him. She was calculating, measuring her words before speaking. Just like he did. Where do you want me to start? She asked. The beginning. After they took you. Nadia nodded slowly. The woman who took me was named Ruth Brennan. She was part of a trafficking network that operated during the chaos of the riots. They weren't political, just opportunists who saw collateral in the confusion. Babies were valuable. White babies especially, but they'd take anyone they could sell. Victor felt bile rise in his throat. Sell. To couples who couldn't conceive. Couldn't adopt through legal channels. People desperate enough not to ask questions. Nadia's voice remained steady, clinical, as if she were reporting on someone else's life. Ruth was supposed to deliver me to a couple in Ohio. But something went wrong with the transaction. The buyers got cold feet when they saw I wasn't white like they'd requested. Ruth panicked. So what did she do? She kept me. Nadia's laugh was bitter. Not out of mercy. She was afraid of her bosses, afraid of what they'd do if she showed up empty-handed. So she raised me herself, if you can call it that. Changed my name, moved us to Atlanta, created an entirely new identity. Nadia Okafor. She borrowed the surname from a dead Nigerian woman she'd known. Made up documents, a birth certificate, a whole fabricated history. Victor's hands clenched into fists on his knees. And you never knew. Not at first. Ruth told me she was my mother. I believed her because what else does a child know? Nadia's eyes grew distant. She wasn't cruel, exactly. She fed me, kept me alive, sent me to school. But there was always this distance, this coldness. Like she was taking care of a pet she'd grown tired of but couldn't get rid of. When did you find out? I was 14. Nadia shifted in her chair, the chains restricting her movement. Ruth got sick. Terminal cancer. She had maybe 6 months left, and I think the guilt finally caught up with her. One night, she got drunk and just told me everything. About the riots, about stealing me from a ventilation shaft while my mother bled out in the next room, about the failed sale, all of it. Victor's vision blurred. He could see it, Maria's body, his infant daughter crying in the darkness, a stranger's hands reaching in. I didn't believe her at first, Nadia continued. I thought it was the medication talking, or the alcohol. But she showed me the Odyssey. She'd kept it all those years, hidden in a box in her closet. The white one with the yellow ducks. There was still blood on it. Maria's blood, Victor whispered. Yes. Nadia's composure cracked for just a moment, her voice wavering. She also had a newspaper clipping about the attack. About the death of Maria Kane and the disappearance of her infant daughter, Isabella. About you, The grieving husband who dedicated his life to restoring order after the chaos that took his family. Victor remembered those newspaper articles. He'd kept one, folded in his wallet, until it had disintegrated from age and repeated handling. Ruth died 2 months after she told me, Nadia said. And I was left with this information I didn't know what to do with. I was angry, at her, at the world, at you. At me. You'd become this symbol of the regime's iron fist. The man who signed execution orders without blinking. Who built the surveillance state, who turned the country into a police fortress. Nadia leaned forward as much as her chains would allow. I read everything about you I could find. About how you transformed your grief into this crusade for security. About the thousands of people who died because you believed order was worth any price. I was trying to prevent what happened to us from happening to others, Victor said, but even as the words left his mouth, they sounded hollow. By becoming the very thing that creates chaos. Nadia shook her head. I spent years wrestling with what to do. Part of me wanted to reach out to you, to tell you I was alive. But another part, the part that saw what you'd become, couldn't reconcile the father Maria loved with the man you turned into. So you joined the resistance. Not immediately. First, I tried to live a normal life. I went to college, studied history and political science, tried to understand how we'd ended up here. Nadia's voice grew stronger. But the more I learned, the more I saw how the system operated. The surveillance, the arbitrary arrests, the way dissent was criminalized. I watched people disappear for speaking out. For asking questions. For existing while being deemed suspicious. Victor wanted to defend himself, to explain that every measure had been necessary, that the world was dangerous and required hard choices. But the words wouldn't come. I was 20 when I attended my first resistance meeting, Nadia continued. It wasn't some dramatic revelation. Just a group of people in a basement, talking about how things used to be before the consolidation. About freedoms we'd lost. About how fear had become the operating system of daily life. Those meetings are monitored. How did you? We were careful. And yes, some of us got caught. Some of my friends are in cells just like this one. Some are dead. Nadia's eyes hardened. Signed off on by you. The accusation hung between them like a physical thing. Victor had no defense. He'd signed hundreds, maybe thousands of orders. He'd never looked at their faces, never considered their stories. They'd been abstractions, threats to be neutralized, problems to be solved. The documents I was caught with, Nadia said, weren't meant to aid enemy forces. They were evidence. Proof of illegal surveillance programs, of black site prisons, of executions carried out without proper trials. I was trying to get them to journalists, to show people what was being done in the name of their safety. That's still treason. Is it treason to expose the truth? Or is it treason to hide it? Nadia tilted her head. You of all people should understand the importance of truth. You spent years searching for the truth about what happened to me. I never stopped looking, Victor admitted. His voice cracked. Every lead, every possible sighting, I followed them all. But they went nowhere. You'd vanished. Because Ruth was good at hiding. And because the system you later helped build made it impossible for people to surface without documentation, without biometric data matching official records. I was a ghost in the machine you created. Victor felt the full weight of the irony. He'd built a surveillance state sophisticated enough to track every citizen's movement, yet it had failed to find his own daughter. Or perhaps it had worked exactly as designed, to erase people, to make them disappear into the cracks. When I realized you were the one overseeing the security apparatus, Nadia said, I made a decision. I would find a way to expose what the regime was doing. And if that meant eventually confronting you, then so be it. So this is revenge? Getting yourself caught, forcing this confrontation? No. Nadia's expression softened for the first time. I didn't plan to get caught. I was sloppy, desperate. The net was closing on our cell, and I took risks I shouldn't have. But when they arrested me, when I saw your name on the execution order. She paused. I thought maybe it was fate. Maybe this was the only way you'd have to face what you'd become. Victor stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. He paced to the far wall, his back to Nadia. His reflection stared back from the polished white surface, a man who'd built his life on certainty, now drowning in doubt. I have questions, he said without turning around. I know. How do I know this isn't an elaborate story? A manipulation designed to save yourself? You don't. Not yet. Nadia's voice was calm. But there are ways to verify. DNA testing, for one. Though I imagine you've already ordered that. Victor had. The moment he'd left the observation booth, he'd sent an encrypted message to the medical division. Rush DNA analysis. Results within 6 hours. Ruth kept other things, Nadia continued. Photos of you and Maria from the apartment. My original birth certificate, the real one, with Isabella Kane written on it. She kept everything in a safety deposit box in Atlanta. Box 247 at First National Bank on Peachtree Street. The key is sewn into the lining of my jacket in evidence storage. Victor turned. Why would she keep evidence? Insurance, maybe. Or guilt. Or maybe some part of her wanted me to find out eventually. Nadia met his eyes. She was a complicated woman. She stole me, raised me under false pretenses, but in her own twisted way, I think she grew to care. She could have sold me to someone else when the first deal fell through. She could have abandoned me. She didn't. That doesn't absolve her. No. It doesn't. Just like the reasons you built the security state don't absolve you of what it's become. The comparison stung because it was apartment. Both he and Ruth Brennan had committed terrible acts while justifying them as necessary. Both had created prisons of their own design. Hers a lie, his a nation of surveillance and fear. If you are Isabella, Victor said slowly, if the DNA confirms it, what then? You're still accused of treason. The evidence against you is real. Then you'll have a choice to make. Nadia's voice was steady. Do you execute your daughter for exposing truth? Or do you finally acknowledge that the system you've built is wrong? It's not that simple. Isn't it? Nadia leaned back, the chains rattling. You've spent 23 years making binary choices. Guilty or innocent. Threat or citizen. Life or death. Surely you can make one more. Victor's phone buzzed in his pocket. He pulled it out, a message from Dr. Chen in medical, preliminary DNA match. 99.7% probability of paternal relationship. Full analysis in 3 hours. His hand trembled as he read the words again. 99.7%. Not absolute certainty, but close enough that the room suddenly felt like it was closing in. He looked at Nadia, at Isabella, and saw not just a resistance fighter or a convicted traitor, but a young woman who carried Maria's eyes and his own stubborn determination. A daughter who'd been stolen, raised in lies, and had somehow survived to become someone who challenged everything he'd built. The execution is scheduled for dawn, Victor said quietly. 6 hours from now. I know. Even if I wanted to stop it, there are protocols. Approvals. General Whitmore, Justice Holloway, the entire tribunal system. You're the Director of National Integrity, Nadia interrupted. You have the authority to override any order you've signed. The question isn't whether you can stop it. It's whether you will. Victor sank back into his chair. For 23 years, he'd operated on certainty. Every decision had been clear-cut, justified by the framework he'd built. But now, faced with his daughter, his supposedly dead daughter, he felt the entire structure crumbling. Tell me about Maria, Nadia said softly. Not the woman from newspaper articles. Tell me who she really was. The request caught him off guard. Why? Because you're the only one who can. Ruth never knew her. I never got to. Nadia's eyes glistened. And if you do execute me in 6 hours, I'd like to die knowing something real about my mother. The words shattered something in Victor's chest. He closed his eyes and let himself remember. Really remember, not the sanitized version he allowed himself on Maria's birthday each year, but the full, painful, beautiful reality of her. She was brilliant, he began. A civil rights attorney who took cases no one else would touch. She believed in justice so fiercely it scared me sometimes. She'd stay up all night preparing arguments, fueled by cheap coffee and pure conviction. Nadia listened, motionless. She had this laugh. God, her laugh. It started as a giggle and turned into this full-body sound that was completely undignified and absolutely perfect. She laughed at my terrible jokes, at our cat's ridiculous antics, at life itself. Victor's voice thickened. When she was pregnant with you, she talked to her belly constantly. Singing, reading poetry, explaining cases she was working on. I told her you couldn't possibly understand, and she said you'd absorb it all anyway. What was her favorite song to sing? Blackbird. She loved the Beatles, played them constantly. But Blackbird was special to her. She said it was about finding freedom despite broken wings. About singing in the darkest hour. Victor opened his eyes. She sang it to you every night. Sometimes I'd stand in the doorway and just watch, thinking I was the luckiest man alive. A tear tracked down Nadia's cheek. She sounds extraordinary. She was. And she'd be horrified by what I've become. The admission felt like expelling poison. She fought against systems like the one I've built. She believed in second chances, in rehabilitation, in the fundamental goodness of people. Everything I've done since losing her has been a betrayal of everything she stood for. Then change it. It's too late. It's never too late. Nadia leaned forward urgently. You think Maria would want you to execute your own daughter to protect a system built on fear? You think she'd want you to choose order over truth? I don't know what Maria would want. She's been dead for 23 years. But I'm not dead. Nadia's voice rose. I'm right here. Her daughter. Your daughter. Alive despite everything. Doesn't that mean something? Victor stood again, unable to contain the chaos roiling inside him. It means everything. And nothing. Because even if I stop your execution, even if I acknowledge who you are, what then? You're a convicted traitor. Others will demand your death. General Whitmore, the tribunal, the entire government apparatus. Then dismantle it. You're asking me to destroy everything I've built. I'm asking you to remember why you built it in the first place. Nadia's chains rattled as she tried to reach toward him. You wanted to prevent others from losing what you lost. But look what you've created instead. A nation of orphans. Children who lose parents to arbitrary arrests. Families torn apart by a system that values order over humanity. You've multiplied your own tragedy 1,000-fold. The truth of her words hit like a physical blow. Victor had spent 2 decades convincing himself that each harsh measure, each sacrifice of freedom for security, was preventing another tragedy like his own. But Nadia was right. He'd simply industrialized that tragedy, made it systemic rather than random. I don't know how to undo it, he admitted. Start with me. Stop my execution. Then we figure out the rest. Victor's phone buzzed again. General Whitmore, we need to talk. Now. My office. The system was already reacting, sensing the threat to its stability. Whitmore would demand explanations, probably order Nadia's execution to proceed as planned. The machine Victor had built was designed to be impervious to individual sentiment, even his own. Especially his own. I need time, Victor said. Time is the one thing neither of us has. Nadia's voice softened. In 6 hours, either I'm dead or you've made a choice to change. There's no middle ground. Victor looked at his daughter, because the DNA had confirmed what his heart had already known, and saw the impossible convergence of past and future. Maria's eyes staring out from a face shaped by suffering and strength. His own determination reflected back at him, but aimed at dismantling rather than building. Guard, he called out. The door opened immediately. 2 armed soldiers entered, alert for threats. The prisoner is to be moved to a secure holding cell in the director's wing, Victor ordered. Medical monitoring, full protection detail. No one accesses her without my direct authorization. Sir, the tribunal has already. I'm invoking executive authority under Security Protocol 7. Do it now. The guards hesitated, then moved to unshackle Nadia from the chair. She stood slowly, her legs stiff from hours of confinement. As they led her past Victor, she paused. Thank you, she whispered. Don't thank me yet. I haven't decided anything. Yes, you have. You just don't know it yet. They took her away, leaving Victor alone in the white chamber. He stared at the chair where she'd sat, at the indentations her shackles had left in the floor, at the cameras still recording every moment. He pulled out his phone and typed a message to General Whitmore, on my way. Then he added another line to Dr. Chen, full DNA analysis. I need absolute certainty. But even as he sent the messages, Victor knew certainty wasn't what he needed. What he needed was courage, the kind Maria had possessed, the kind that made hard choices not because they were easy to justify, but because they were right. The kind of courage his daughter had just shown him, staring down her own death to speak truth. Victor left the chamber and walked through corridors he'd walked 1,000 times, but everything looked different now. The surveillance cameras weren't protection, they were eyes of a panopticon. The security checkpoints weren't safety measures, they were barriers to freedom. The entire structure he'd built revealed itself as what it truly was, a monument to fear, dressed up as security. And somewhere in this fortress of his own design, his daughter waited to see if he had the strength to tear it all down. General Whitmore's office occupied the top floor of the Capitol Security Tower, a glass-enclosed space that offered a panoramic view of Washington, D.C.'s fortified landscape. Victor had been here countless times for strategy sessions, threat assessments, and policy decisions. Tonight, walking through the door felt like entering enemy territory. Whitmore stood by the window, a silhouette against the city lights. He was a decade older than Victor, with close-cropped grey hair and the rigid posture of a career military man. He didn't turn when Victor entered. "Shut the door," Whitmore said. Victor complied. The click of the lock seemed unnaturally loud. "DNA results came back," Whitmore continued, still facing the window. "I had my own test run. Wanted to be sure before we had this conversation." "You had no authority." "I have every authority when the Director of National Integrity starts making emotional decisions that compromise national security." Whitmore finally turned, his face carved from granite. "She's your daughter. I get it. Hell, Victor, I can't imagine what you're feeling. But that doesn't change what she is. She's an innocent woman caught up in. She's a terrorist." Whitmore cut him off. The documents she was carrying contained classified information about our detention facilities, our surveillance protocols, our entire operational infrastructure. If that data reaches the resistance, it will compromise every security measure we've implemented in the last 20 years. Victor moved to the bar cart and poured himself 2 fingers of scotch. He needed something to do with his hands. The charges could be re-evaluated. Given the circumstances. What circumstances? That she happens to share your DNA. Whitmore crossed his arms. "Victor, listen to yourself. You've signed execution orders for 347 individuals in the past 18 months alone. Some of them had families. Some of them claimed innocence. You never wavered because you understood the necessity of the system. But now, because this particular traitor is biologically connected to you, suddenly the system doesn't apply. She was stolen from me as a child. Raised under false identity. She never had a chance. Neither did the children of the people she would have endangered with her espionage." Whitmore slammed his hand on the desk. "You think the resistance plays fair? You think the Eastern Bloc cells she was feeding information to care about innocent lives? Every compromise in our security, every leaked document, every exposed operation, they all lead to deaths. Real deaths of real people." Victor drank the scotch in one burning swallow. "So your solution is to execute my daughter?" "My solution is to maintain the integrity of the system we've built. The same system that has prevented another civil war, that has maintained order when everything was collapsing." Whitmore's voice dropped. "I was there with you, Victor. After Maria died. After Isabella disappeared. I watched you nearly destroy yourself with grief. I helped you channel that pain into purpose. We built this together. Maybe we built the wrong thing." The words hung in the air like a grenade with the pin pulled. Whitmore's expression hardened. "Don't do this. Don't let 23 years of sacrifice mean nothing because of one emotional confrontation." "She told me about Maria," Victor said quietly. "Things no one else could know. Private moments, intimate details. She's not lying, Garrett. She's my daughter. I know she is. The DNA proves it." Whitmore moved closer. "But that's exactly why she's so dangerous. She knows how to manipulate you. The resistance has been trying to compromise you for years. What better weapon than a lost daughter who can pull at your heartstrings while gathering intelligence? You think this is a setup? I think it's convenient. She gets caught with classified documents, faces execution, and suddenly reveals she's Isabella Kane? She had years to come forward, Victor. Years to contact you. Why now, when she's facing death?" The question burrowed into Victor's mind like a parasite. He wanted to dismiss it, but Whitmore was right about the timing. Why had Nadia waited until she was convicted to reveal herself? She said she watched what I'd become, Victor said. That she couldn't reconcile the father Maria loved with the man running the security state. Exactly. She's been watching you. Studying you. Learning your vulnerabilities. Whitmore pulled out a tablet and swiped through files. We've been tracking her cell for 8 months. She's not some naive idealist swept up in resistance rhetoric. She's a trained operative. Look at this. He turned the tablet toward Victor. Surveillance photos showed Nadia at various locations, meeting with known resistance members, conducting counter-surveillance maneuvers, handling encrypted communication devices with practiced ease. She knows operational security, Whitmore continued. She knows how to avoid detection, how to run intelligence operations. Someone trained her, Victor. And not recently, these techniques take years to master. Victor studied the images. Nadia moved through them with confidence, with purpose. This wasn't an amateur activist. This was someone who understood the game. Who trained her? Victor asked. We're still investigating. But our analysts believe she's been part of resistance networks since her late teens. That's 7, maybe 8 years of active involvement. This isn't a woman who stumbled into rebellion. She chose it. Because of what I built. She said as much. Or because she was radicalized by people who saw an opportunity. Whitmore closed the tablet. Think about it strategically, Victor. You're the architect of the security state. You're untouchable through conventional means. But what if someone could get close to you emotionally? What if they could find a way to compromise your judgment? You're saying the resistance orchestrated this. I'm saying it's possible. Ruth Brennan, the woman who raised her, died 10 years ago. We have no way to verify most of Nadia's story. What we do know is that a convicted terrorist is claiming to be your daughter at the exact moment it would benefit her most. And now you're moving her to a secure facility under your personal protection, giving her access to the Director of National Integrity. Victor poured another scotch. The logic was sound, maddeningly so. But it didn't account for the music box, the lullaby, the crescent moon birthmark. Those details were too specific, too intimate to be fabricated. Unless Ruth Brennan had told others before she died. Unless the resistance had been planning this for years, knowing that someday they might need to use Isabella Kane as a weapon against her father. What are you suggesting? Victor asked. Follow protocol. Let the execution proceed as scheduled. Whitmore's voice softened slightly. I know how hard that is. But it's the only way to protect everything we've built. If you show weakness now, if you compromise the system for personal reasons, it all falls apart. Every other prisoner will look for their own angle. Every resistance cell will see an opportunity. We'll be back to chaos within months. And if she really is innocent? If she's telling the truth about everything? Then she's a casualty of war. Tragic, but necessary. Whitmore met Victor's eyes. You've accepted that calculus hundreds of times before. Don't change the equation now just because you can put a name to the casualty. Victor's phone buzzed. A message from Dr. Chen. Final DNA analysis complete. 99.9% certainty of paternal relationship. Additional markers suggest maternal DNA consistent with Maria Kane's medical records. She is definitely your biological daughter. He showed the screen to Whitmore. The general read it and nodded. I never doubted the biology, Victor. I doubt her intentions. Being your daughter doesn't make her less of a threat, it makes her more of one. A knock at the door interrupted them. Whitmore's assistant entered. Sir, Justice Holloway is requesting an emergency session with both of you. The Tribunal Council has questions about the postponement of the Okafor execution. Tell her we'll address it in the morning, Victor said. She's insistent it be tonight, sir. She's invoked Tribunal Protocol 12, judicial override of executive postponement in cases of national security. Victor's jaw clenched. Protocol 12 was designed to prevent any single individual, even the director, from unilaterally stopping executions. It required approval from a majority of the Tribunal Council, 7 judges who answered to no one but the law. The law Victor had helped write. How long do we have? Whitmore asked. The council convenes in 2 hours, sir. Midnight. Both of you are required to attend and provide justification for the postponement, or the original execution order stands as scheduled. Whitmore dismissed the assistant and turned to Victor. This is it. You have 2 hours to decide if you're going to let the system work as designed, or if you're going to tear it down for one person. My daughter. A terrorist who shares your DNA. Whitmore moved to the door. I'll support whatever decision you make at the council, Victor. But I need to know you've thought this through rationally, not emotionally. Can you honestly say executing Nadia Okafor is the wrong decision for national security? Victor wanted to say yes. He wanted to argue that mercy had a place even in a security state, that exceptions could be made, that being his daughter should matter. But Whitmore's question cut deeper. If Nadia weren't his daughter, would he hesitate to let the execution proceed? The answer terrified him. I need to talk to her again, Victor said. Bad idea. The more you engage, the more she can manipulate. 2 hours. Garrett. You're giving me 2 hours to make a decision. I'm going to spend it getting answers. Whitmore studied him for a long moment. Don't let her play you, Victor. She's had 23 years to learn how to survive. That kind of resilience doesn't come without learning how to use people. Victor left without responding. He took the private elevator down to sublevel 3, where high-value prisoners were held in isolation. The secure holding cell he'd ordered for Nadia was actually a converted interrogation suite, more comfortable than a standard cell, but still very much a cage. 2 guards stood outside the door. They snapped to attention when they saw him. Has she had any visitors? Victor asked. No, sir. Medical performed a routine examination an hour ago, but otherwise no contact. I'm going in alone. Sir, protocol requires. I wrote the protocols. I'm going in alone. He entered the cell. Nadia sat on a narrow bed, her orange prison uniform exchanged for grey facility clothing. She'd been given food, a tray with half-eaten pasta sat on a small table, and access to a shower. Her hair was still damp. She looked younger this way. Vulnerable. Like someone's daughter. They're going to kill me at dawn anyway, aren't they? Nadia said without preamble. Victor closed the door. The tribunal council is convening at midnight. I have to justify why your execution should be postponed. And will you? I don't know. Victor sat across from her. General Whitmore makes a compelling case that you're manipulating me. That revealing yourself now, at this exact moment, is too convenient to be genuine. Of course he does. That's his job, to maintain the system at all costs. Nadia leaned forward. Let me ask you something. If I were trying to manipulate you, why would I do it this way? Why get arrested with classified documents, face execution, and only then reveal who I am? Wouldn't it be smarter to approach you when I wasn't facing death? To build a relationship slowly, gain your trust over time. Unless you were caught unexpectedly and this was your only option. Fair point. Nadia acknowledged it with a nod. So, what would convince you? What proof do you need that I'm telling the truth? I don't know if proof exists. The DNA confirms you're my biological daughter. The details you know about Maria confirm you have information that shouldn't be accessible. But that doesn't confirm your intentions. My intentions are to survive and to expose a corrupt system. In that order. Nadia's bluntness was startling. I'm not going to pretend I'm some selfless martyr. I want to live. I'm scared of dying. And yes, revealing myself to you was a desperate move because I ran out of options. The honesty caught Victor off guard. At least you're not denying the desperation. Why would I? You're not an idiot, and treating you like one would be insulting to both of us. Nadia stood and paced the small cell. Here's what I know. In 6 hours, maybe less, I'm going to die unless you intervene. Everything I've told you is true, about Ruth, about being stolen, about growing up discovering my father had become the thing my mother would have fought against. But I also know that truth alone isn't enough to save me. Then what is? You deciding that the system you built should have room for mercy. For second chances. For the possibility that even someone who broke your laws might have had good reasons. Nadia stopped pacing and faced him. Or you deciding that being right matters more than being secure. Those aren't mutually exclusive. In your system, they are. You've built a structure where security requires absolute compliance, where dissent equals treason, where exposure of wrongdoing is criminalized as espionage. There's no room for nuance, no space for justified resistance. You either obey or you die. Victor stood abruptly. You don't understand the necessity. I understand perfectly. Fear justifies anything. Trauma becomes policy. Loss gets weaponized into law. Nadia's voice rose to match his. You lost Maria and me, so you decided the entire nation should live in a prison disguised as safety. You made your pain everyone's problem. I saved this country from tearing itself apart. You embalmed it. There's a difference between peace and paralysis. Nadia moved closer. People are afraid to speak, to question, to live authentically because your system treats every deviation as a threat. You didn't prevent chaos, Dad. You just made it quiet. The word Dad stopped Victor cold. She'd said it so naturally, so easily, as if they'd had 23 years to establish the relationship instead of 3 hours of desperate conversation. Don't call me that, he said quietly. Why not? It's what you are. Biology confirms it, Maria's stories prove it, and somewhere underneath all this, she gestured at his suit, his rigid posture, his carefully controlled expression, you know it. Being a father requires more than DNA. Then be more than DNA. Be what Maria would have wanted you to be. Nadia's eyes glistened. She fought for justice, for the marginalized, for people who had no voice. What would she think of what you've become? What would she say if she knew you were about to execute your own daughter for continuing her work? You're not continuing her work. She was a lawyer who operated within the system. The system didn't exist anymore. It collapsed. Remember? During the riots, during the consolidation, during the transformation into whatever this is. Nadia swept her arm to encompass the facility. Maria worked within the law because the law meant something. Your law is just codified fear. Victor wanted to argue, to defend every decision, every policy, every execution order he'd signed. But standing in this cell with his daughter, with Maria's daughter, he couldn't find the words. Because she was right. He'd built a monument to fear and called it security. He'd industrialized his own trauma and imposed it on millions. And now the system he'd created was demanding he sacrifice his own child to maintain its integrity. The tribunal meets in 90 minutes, Victor said. I need to know, if I save you, what then? You're still a convicted criminal. The evidence against you is real. I can postpone your execution, but I can't erase your crimes. Then let me stand trial. A real trial, not a tribunal rubber stamp. Let me present evidence about what the system is doing. Let me show people what I found. That information is classified. Because exposing it would reveal how corrupt the system is. Nadia grabbed his arm. Don't you see? The classification isn't about national security. It's about protecting the regime from accountability. Everything I found, every document I copied, it's all evidence of crimes committed in the name of order. Victor pulled away. Even if that's true, releasing that information would destabilize everything. We'd be back to chaos within months. Maybe chaos is better than this. You didn't live through the riots. You were an infant. You don't remember the bodies in the streets, the cities burning, the complete breakdown of society. I do. Garrett does. Everyone who built this system does. We swore never again. So you built a tomb and called it civilization. Nadia's voice broke. Don't you want to live again, Dad? Don't you want to be more than the architect of a fear machine? Victor's phone buzzed. A message from Whitmore, council assembling early. They want this resolved. 30 minutes. They'd cut his time in half. The system was closing ranks, protecting itself. I have to go, Victor said. What are you going to tell them? He looked at his daughter, at this fierce, brilliant young woman who'd survived being stolen, who'd rebuilt her identity from lies, who'd found the courage to fight against impossible odds. She had Maria's passion, Maria's sense of justice, Maria's unwillingness to accept easy answers. And she had his stubbornness, his strategic mind, his ability to see systems and find their weak points. She was the daughter they'd made together, even if they'd only had 6 months to know her as an infant. I'm going to tell them the truth, Victor said finally. Which truth? That I'm your daughter, or that the system is broken? I don't know yet. He left her there, locked in a cell in a facility he designed, waiting to hear if her father would choose her or the machine he'd built to replace her. The tribunal council chamber was smaller than Victor expected, almost intimate. 7 judges sat in a semicircle, with Justice Holloway at the center. General Whitmore stood to the side, his expression neutral but his eyes watchful. Victor took the position in front of them, the defendant's spot, though technically he was there to justify his executive action. Justice Holloway spoke first. Director Kane, you invoked Protocol 7 to postpone the execution of Nadia Okafor. This council has convened to determine if that postponement is justified. Do you understand the proceedings? I do. Then please state your justification. Victor took a breath. This was it, the moment where he either maintained the system or began dismantling it. Nadia Okafor is my biological daughter, he said. DNA evidence confirms she is Isabella Kane, who was kidnapped during the May riots 23 years ago. A murmur rippled through the council. Justice Holloway's expression didn't change. We're aware of the biological connection, she said. That's not sufficient justification for postponement. Many convicted criminals have family connections. We don't allow those connections to interfere with justice. I'm not asking for interference. I'm asking for a proper investigation into her circumstances. She was raised under false identity, unaware of her true parentage until she was 14. Her path to resistance involvement should be examined in that context. The tribunal examined all relevant evidence, another judge said. Her upbringing, while unusual, doesn't change the fact that she knowingly committed treason as an adult. But it provides context. Context doesn't override evidence. Justice Holloway leaned forward. Director Kane, I sympathize with your situation. But you of all people understand why we can't allow personal relationships to compromise the integrity of our judicial process. You've signed hundreds of execution orders for individuals who had families, who had extenuating circumstances. Why should this case be different? Victor felt the trap closing. Every argument he made could be turned against him using his own precedents. Because I might have been wrong, he said quietly. The chamber went silent. Excuse me, Justice Holloway said. Victor stood straighter. I might have been wrong. About all of it. The hundreds of orders I signed, the system I built, the assumption that security requires sacrificing mercy. Looking at my daughter, knowing what she survived, hearing why she fought, I think I might have been wrong. Director Kane, General Whitmore said, warning in his voice. But Victor couldn't stop. 23 years of certainty crumbled in the face of one undeniable truth. He'd built a system that demanded he execute his own daughter, and if that was justice, then justice itself had become monstrous. I propose we dissolve this tribunal, Victor said. Not just for Nadia, but entirely. Replace it with a real judicial system with real due process. One where evidence can be challenged, where context matters, where mercy is possible. You're talking about dismantling the entire security structure, Justice Holloway said. I'm talking about remembering we're supposed to be human beings, not cogs in a fear machine. General Whitmore moved forward. Victor, think about what you're saying. You're emotional, understandably so. But don't make a decision in the heat of the moment that you'll regret. I've been regretting my decisions for years. I just didn't want to admit it. Victor turned to the council. Every execution I signed, I told myself it was necessary. That we were preventing chaos. But we didn't prevent chaos. We just centralized it, made it official, gave it the veneer of law. We became the thing we feared. If we dissolve the tribunals, what replaces them? A judge asked. The system exists because the alternative is anarchy. The alternative is actual justice. Trials with defense attorneys. Appeals processes. Proportional sentencing. All the things we eliminated in the name of efficiency. Victor's voice grew stronger. Yes, it will be messier. Yes, it will be slower. But at least it will be human. Justice Holloway stood. This council doesn't have the authority to dissolve itself based on one man's emotional crisis. Director Kane, you're clearly compromised. We're going to proceed with the execution as scheduled. Then I resign. The words echoed in the chamber like a gunshot. You can't resign in the middle of, Whitmore started. I can and I am. Effective immediately, I resign as Director of National Integrity. Which means I have no authority to postpone executions, but you also have no authority to compel my testimony or justification. Victor pulled out his security credentials and placed them on the judge's bench. Nadia Okafor is my daughter. If you execute her, you do it without my sanction or participation. He walked toward the door. Victor. Whitmore called after him. If you walk out that door, everything we built is at risk. The government will collapse within weeks. The resistance will see weakness and strike. Everything will fall apart. Victor paused at the threshold and looked back at the general who'd been his friend, his ally, his co-architect of the security state. Good, he said. Let it fall. We'll build something better from the ruins. He left the chamber and didn't look back. Have you ever realized you were wrong about something you built your entire life around? What did you do? Victor's footsteps echoed through the empty corridor like a countdown clock. He'd walked these halls for 2 decades as one of the most powerful men in the nation. Now, stripped of his credentials, he was just a father racing against time to save his daughter. His phone buzzed continuously, messages from department heads, security chiefs, government officials all demanding explanations. He ignored them all except one from Dr. Chen. Sir, they're moving the prisoner. Orders from General Whitmore. Execution moved up to 0200 hours. 20 minutes from now. Victor's blood turned to ice. Whitmore wasn't waiting for dawn. He was accelerating the timeline, probably calculating that Victor's resignation had created a narrow window to eliminate Nadia before the situation spiraled further out of control. 20 minutes. Victor broke into a run. The sublevel 3 holding cells were 4 floors down and half a building away. In his former position, he could have ordered an immediate halt with a single call. Now, he had no authority, no leverage, no power except the desperation of a father. He reached the elevator and jabbed the button. Nothing happened. His credentials had already been deactivated. The system was efficient. He designed it that way. Victor sprinted to the emergency stairwell, taking the steps 3 at a time. His dress shoes slipped on the concrete, his 52-year-old body protesting the sudden exertion, but he didn't slow down. Behind him, he heard shouting, security responding to his unauthorized movement through the facility. He burst through the sublevel 3 door and ran down the corridor toward Nadia's cell. The 2 guards stationed outside saw him coming and drew their weapons. Stand down, sir, one of them commanded. You're no longer authorized. That's my daughter in there. Victor shouted. They're going to kill her. Sir, we have orders from General Whitmore. The execution has been expedited due to security concerns. You need to step back. Victor didn't stop running. The guards tensed, fingers on triggers, but at the last moment they hesitated, probably because pointing a weapon at the former director, even one who just resigned, wasn't something they'd been trained to do. Victor used their hesitation to slip past and slam his hand against the cell door. Nadia. Nadia. The door was locked, impervious. Through the small window, he could see her standing in the center of the room, her face pale but composed. She saw him and moved to the door. They're coming for me, aren't they? She said through the reinforced glass. I'm getting you out. Victor looked around frantically. Without credentials, he couldn't access the electronic locks. The guards behind him were calling for backup, and he could hear boots thundering down the corridor, probably a full tactical team. Dad. Nadia's voice was calm. It's okay. It's not okay. I'm not letting them. Listen to me. She pressed her palm against the glass. What you did in that chamber, resigning, challenging the system, that matters more than whether I live or die. Don't say that. Don't you dare give up. I'm not giving up. I'm just being realistic. Tears tracked down her cheeks, but her voice remained steady. If I die, at least I die knowing my father chose right over easy. That he chose me over the machine. That means everything. You're not dying today. Victor turned to the guards. Please. She's my daughter. She was stolen from me as an infant. I just found her. I can't lose her again. Please. The guards exchanged uncertain glances. They were young, probably had families of their own. But before either could respond, a new voice cut through the corridor. Step away from the cell, Victor. General Whitmore emerged from the stairwell with 6 armed soldiers. He looked tired, older than his years, but his resolve was absolute. Don't do this, Garrett, Victor said. I have to. You've compromised yourself, compromised the entire security apparatus. If we show weakness now, if we let personal relationships override law, the whole structure collapses. Good. Let it collapse. You think chaos is better. Whitmore moved closer. You remember what it was like before, the violence, the anarchy, the complete breakdown. We built this system to prevent that. To save lives. We built a prison and called it peace. Victor positioned himself in front of Nadia's door. You want to execute her, you go through me. Victor, please. Don't make this harder than it has to be. Harder? You're about to kill my daughter and you want me to make it easier for you. Whitmore's jaw tightened. Soldiers, remove the former director from the premises. Use necessary force if required. The soldiers advanced, weapons raised but not aimed. They clearly didn't want to hurt Victor, but they would follow orders. That was the nature of the system. Obedience without question, efficiency without mercy. Victor spread his arms, making himself a barrier. You'll have to shoot me. Don't be dramatic. I'm serious. Garrett. You execute her. You execute me first. Let's see how stable your system remains when you kill both the former director and his daughter in the same night. Whitmore hesitated. Victor could see the calculation happening behind his eyes, weighing the optics, the potential fallout, the precedent it would set. Dad, stop. Nadia's voice came from behind the door. Don't martyr yourself for me. That's not how you change things. I'm not letting them take you. You can't stop them. But you can do something more important. You can survive to dismantle what you built. Dead, you're just a cautionary tale. Alive, you're a threat to the entire system. Victor turned to look at her through the window. She stood tall despite everything, despite the certainty of death mere minutes away. She had Maria's courage, that same unflinching ability to face impossible odds with grace. I can't lose you again, Victor whispered. You never really had me to lose. But maybe, her voice cracked, maybe in whatever comes after, we'll get the time we should have had. No. No, I refuse to accept that. Victor spun back to Whitmore. Name your price. What do you want? I'll confess to whatever crimes you need. I'll publicly recant my resignation. There is no price, Victor. The law is the law. The law is what we decide it is. We wrote these laws. We can change them. Not in the next 15 minutes, we can't. Whitmore's expression softened slightly. I'm sorry. I truly am. But the execution will proceed. Victor lunged at him. The soldiers moved instantly, grabbing his arms, restraining him. He fought with everything he had, throwing elbows, kicking, trying to break free through sheer desperation. But there were 6 of them and they were trained, and he was a 52-year-old man who'd spent 2 decades behind a desk. They dragged him away from the door. No. Nadia. Nadia. Victor's voice cracked with anguish as they pulled him down the corridor. He could see her face in the window, see her pressing her palm against the glass, see her mouthing words he couldn't hear. Then she was gone, blocked by soldiers moving into position for the extraction. They hauled Victor to an adjacent observation room and locked him inside. It was cruel irony. He'd observed tribunals from rooms like this countless times, watching other fathers, other mothers, other families destroyed by the machine he'd built. Now he was on the other side of the glass, forced to witness his own daughter's execution. The observation window looked into the execution chamber, a sterile white room with a single chair, restraint mechanisms, and the automated injection system that delivered the lethal drugs. It was supposed to be humane, efficient, clean. Victor had designed it. He pounded on the glass. Whitmore. Garrett. Stop this. I'll give you anything. But the general was already gone, leaving only the soldiers and the protocol. The machine didn't need human oversight anymore. It ran on its own momentum. They brought Nadia in. She didn't resist as they secured her to the chair, didn't plead or cry out. She simply looked around the room with an expression that was almost curious, as if she were studying the mechanics of her own death. Then her eyes found the observation window. Found Victor. She smiled. It broke him. Victor collapsed against the glass, his fists beating uselessly against the reinforced surface. I'm sorry. God, Nadia. I'm so sorry. I'm sorry I wasn't there. I'm sorry I built this. I'm sorry I failed you. She shook her head slowly, still smiling. She mouthed 3 words, I love you. Victor had waited 23 years to hear his daughter say that. He'd imagined it 1,000 different ways, at graduations, at weddings, in quiet moments over coffee. Never like this. Never through soundproof glass while poison prepared to flow through her veins. I love you too, he sobbed. I love you so much. The automated system activated. A mechanical voice began the countdown, execution commencing in 60 seconds. All personnel clear the chamber. The soldiers filed out, leaving Nadia alone in the white room. The injection tubes were already in place, connected to the chair's automated delivery system. In 60 seconds, 3 drugs would flow, 1 to render her unconscious, 1 to paralyze her, 1 to stop her heart. 50 seconds. Victor looked around the observation room desperately. There had to be an emergency override, a manual control, something. But he designed the system to be tamper-proof, to prevent exactly this kind of interference. 40 seconds. Please, Victor whispered to anyone who might be listening. Please don't let it end like this. 30 seconds. Nadia closed her eyes. Her lips moved, praying, maybe, or just saying goodbye to a life she'd fought so hard to live. 20 seconds. Victor thought of Maria. Wondered if she was waiting somewhere for their daughter, ready to hold her again after 23 years apart. Wondered if they'd both forgive him for failing them so completely. 10 seconds. The mechanical voice counted down. 9, 8, 7. Victor pressed his forehead against the glass. I'm sorry, Isabella. I'm so sorry. 6, 5, 4. Nadia opened her eyes one last time and looked directly at him. Her lips formed words. Change it. Promise me. Change everything. 3, 2. The lights went out. Not just in the execution chamber, throughout the entire facility. Emergency systems kicked in after a moment, bathing everything in red light, but the execution system remained dark. Silent. Victor stared in disbelief. Power failures didn't happen in the Capitol Security Tower. The building had triple redundancy, backup generators, isolated grids specifically to prevent this. Unless someone had deliberately sabotaged it. The door to the observation room burst open. Dr. Chen stood there, breathing hard, holding what looked like a portable EMP device. We have maybe 3 minutes before they reroute power. Can you get her out? Chen, what did you? The DNA results. When I saw she was your daughter, I started thinking about all the times you've talked about Maria, about the daughter you lost. I couldn't, Chen's voice broke. I couldn't let the system take another child from you. Not when I had the ability to stop it. Victor didn't waste time on questions. He ran to the execution chamber door. Without power, the electronic locks were disengaged, operating on manual failsafes. He wrenched it open. Nadia sat in the chair, eyes wide with shock. What? No time. We're leaving. Now. Victor's hands shook as he unclasped the restraints. The injection tubes fell away, unused. Dad, if you do this, you're a fugitive. They'll hunt you. I don't care. I've spent 23 years choosing the system over everything that mattered. Not anymore. He pulled her to her feet. Can you run? I can run. Chen appeared in the doorway. Sublevel parking garage, Section C. I left my car unlocked, keys in the visor. Head south on Highway 295. There's a resistance safe house in Richmond. They'll hide you. Come with us, Victor said. Someone needs to stay and confuse the response. Buy you more time. Chen pressed something into Victor's hand, a data drive. Everything Nadia was trying to leak. All the evidence about the detention centers, the illegal surveillance, the extrajudicial killings. Get it to journalists. Burn it all down. Alarms began to blare. Backup power was coming online faster than expected. Go! Chen shouted. Victor grabbed Nadia's hand and ran. They sprinted through red-lit corridors, past confused soldiers who were still trying to figure out what had happened. Without his credentials, without his authority, Victor was just another man in a suit running through chaos. It was liberating. They reached the stairwell and climbed toward the parking levels. Behind them, they could hear orders being shouted, security protocols activating, the machine beginning to organize its response. But they had a head start, and more importantly, they had purpose. They burst into the parking garage. Chen's car, a nondescript sedan, waited in Section C exactly as promised. Victor yanked open the door, pushed Nadia inside, and slid behind the wheel. The keys were in the visor. He started the engine and drove toward the exit. The garage gate was closed, probably locked down due to the security alert. But the manual override, another fail-safe he'd personally designed, was still accessible. Victor crashed through the weakened gate. Metal screamed and sparks flew, but they broke through onto the street beyond. Washington, D.C. stretched before them, a maze of surveillance cameras and checkpoints. But it was also a city of millions of people, thousands of vehicles, countless places to disappear. For the first time in 2 decades, the security apparatus Victor had built was working against him. He hoped Chen's directions were accurate. He hoped the resistance safe house was real and not a trap. He hoped they could survive long enough to expose what he'd created. But mostly, he just focused on driving, on keeping his daughter safe, on doing what he should have done 23 years ago, choosing family over fear. Nadia sat in the passenger seat, staring at him with an expression of wonder and disbelief. "You really just threw away everything for me." "No," Victor said. "I threw away everything that didn't matter. You're all that's left that does." She reached over and took his hand. Her grip was strong, certain, Maria's grip. "What now?" she asked. Victor thought about the data drive in his pocket, about Chen's sacrifice, about the system that would be hunting them within minutes. He thought about Justice Holloway and General Whitmore and all the others who'd built the security state alongside him. They'd see him as a traitor now, a threat to be neutralized. They'd be right. "Now," Victor said, "we finish what you started. We expose everything. We show people what we built and why it needs to come down. They'll kill us. Probably. But at least we'll die together. As father and daughter. As we should have lived." Nadia squeezed his hand tighter. "Maria would be proud of you. For finally choosing right." Victor's eyes burned with tears he didn't try to hide. "I hope so. God, I hope so." They drove south through the night, leaving behind the Capitol Security Tower and everything it represented. Sirens wailed in the distance, growing louder. The hunt had begun. But for the first time in 23 years, Victor Kane felt like he was running toward something instead of away from it. He was running toward redemption. Toward his daughter. Toward the man Maria had fallen in love with, before loss had transformed him into a monster. The road stretched ahead into darkness, uncertain and dangerous. But Nadia sat beside him, alive and free, and that made every risk worth taking. He'd ordered her death. She was his lost daughter. And now, together, they would dismantle the empire he'd built to fill the void her absence had created. The safe house in Richmond was a converted warehouse on the edge of the industrial district, the kind of building that had been abandoned during the economic collapse and never reclaimed. Victor pulled Chen's sedan into an alley behind the structure, killed the engine, and sat in the sudden silence, his hand still gripping the steering wheel like a lifeline. "Are you sure this is the place?" Nadia asked, peering at the graffiti-covered walls and broken windows. Chen said Section C, south on 295, Richmond Safe House. "This matches the coordinates." Victor checked his phone one last time before powering it down completely. The device was a tracking beacon now. Keeping it active was suicide. "We need to move. They'll have our last known trajectory within the hour." They exited the car and approached a rusted metal door. Before Victor could knock, it swung open. A woman in her 30s stood there, holding a shotgun with practiced ease. She had dark skin, close-cropped hair, and eyes that assessed them with tactical precision. "You're the package Chen called about?" she asked. "If by package you mean a fugitive former director and his convicted terrorist daughter, then yes," Victor said. The woman's expression didn't change, but she lowered the shotgun slightly. "I'm Maya. Not the name I was born with, but it's the one I use now. Come in. Quickly." They followed her into a space that looked abandoned from the outside but was clearly operational within. Computer equipment hummed in corners, maps covered the walls with pins marking locations, and half a dozen people worked at various stations. They all stopped and stared when Victor entered. "Holy shit," a young man with thick glasses said. "That's actually Victor Kane." Was Victor Kane, Victor corrected. As of 4 hours ago, I'm nobody with significant authority and significant problems. Maya gestured for them to follow her to a back room that served as an office. Chen's message said you have data. Documents about the detention system. Victor pulled out the drive Chen had given him. Everything Nadia was trying to leak when she was arrested, plus whatever else Chen managed to pull before cutting the power. Surveillance programs, black site locations, execution records, the full operational structure of the security state. And you're willing to release it? Knowing what it will do to the government you built. Maya took the drive but didn't plug it in yet, still evaluating whether this was a trap. I'm counting on what it will do to the government, Victor said. The structure is rotten. It needs to collapse so something better can grow. People will die in that collapse. Systems fail violently. You of all people should know that. People are already dying. Nadia spoke up for the first time. Quietly, invisibly, in facilities that don't officially exist. At least this way, they'll die fighting for something better instead of being disappeared by a machine that pretends it's justice. Maya studied them both for a long moment, then plugged the drive into an isolated laptop. Her fingers flew across the keyboard, eyes scanning files. The further she read, the more her expression darkened. Jesus Christ, she whispered. There are over 200 black sites. 40,000 people detained without trial. The surveillance network monitors 93% of all digital communications in the country. She looked up at Victor. You built this? Yes. Why? It was such a simple question. Victor had spent 23 years answering it with justifications about security, stability, preventing chaos. But standing in this resistance safe house with his daughter beside him, those answers rang hollow. Because I was broken, he said finally. My wife was murdered, my daughter stolen, and I decided the entire world needed to pay for that loss. I built a prison and convinced myself it was protection. And now I want to tear it down. Even if it means I go down with it. Maya closed the laptop. You understand that releasing this will put a target on both of you? Not just from the government, from everyone who benefits from the current system. Military contractors, surveillance corporations, political figures who've built careers on security theater. You'll have enemies you can't imagine. We already do, Nadia said. They were going to execute me 3 hours ago. My father's resignation made him a traitor to the regime. We've got nothing left to lose. Except your lives. Then we'd better make them count while we have them. Victor met Maya's gaze. How quickly can you distribute this data? If it's as explosive as it looks, we can have it in the hands of 20 different journalist networks within an hour. International media, underground publications, verified independent sources. Once it's out there, there's no putting it back in the box. Good. Do it. Maya nodded and left with the drive. Victor and Nadia were left alone in the small office. The adrenaline that had sustained them through the escape was fading, replaced by exhaustion and the weight of what they'd just set in motion. Nadia sank into a chair. We really did it. We're actually going to blow up your entire legacy. It's not a legacy worth preserving. Victor sat across from her. Maria would have burned it down years ago if she'd seen what it became. Tell me more about her, Nadia said quietly. I know the stories Ruth told, and the fragments you've shared, but I want to know who she really was. If we're going to die for her principles, I should understand them. So Victor told her. Not the sanitized memories he'd held onto, but the full truth, Maria's fierce temper when she encountered injustice, her terrible singing voice that she inflicted on him anyway, her habit of bringing home stray causes and people who needed help. The way she'd argued with him about his tendency toward black and white thinking, insisting that the world was shades of grey. She saw complexity where I saw threats, Victor said. She believed in redemption where I believed in punishment. She would have fought the security state from day one, would have been one of the people I labeled as dissidents and had arrested. But she loved you anyway. She loved the man I was before I broke. I don't know if she would have recognized what I became. I think she would have, Nadia said. I think she would have seen the broken man underneath the director, and she would have fought to bring him back. The way I'm trying to. Victor felt his throat tighten. You barely know me. I signed your execution order. Why would you fight for me? Because you're my father. Because you chose me over everything else when it mattered. Because, Nadia's voice cracked, because I spent 23 years wondering what you were like, building this image of you as either a monster or a hero, and discovering you're just a man who made terrible choices from terrible pain. That's somehow more important than either extreme. I don't deserve your forgiveness. Maybe not. But you have it anyway. That's how family works. You get to be forgiven for things you don't deserve. Nadia reached across and took his hand. Now we just have to live long enough to make that forgiveness mean something. Maya returned an hour later. It's out. Every major news network has the files. The International Transparency Coalition is verifying documents. 3 different congressional oversight committees are already calling emergency sessions. The government is in complete chaos. Whitmore's trying to contain it, but it's too big, too fast. What's the public response? Victor asked. Shock. Anger. Fear. People are realizing they've been living in a surveillance state that makes the old regime look benign by comparison. There are protests forming in every major city. Some are calling for trials, some for immediate revolution. It's volatile. Will it work? Will it actually change anything? Too early to say. But you've definitely lit the match. Now we see if the whole structure burns or if they manage to contain it. Victor's old phone, still powered off, sat on the desk like a ticking bomb. He turned it off to avoid tracking, but he knew there would be messages, calls, threats. His entire former life trying to reach him, to drag him back, to make him face consequences. I should check it, he said. See what they're saying. Bad idea, Maya warned. The second you power that on, they can triangulate your location. They probably already know we're in Richmond. The question is whether they're willing to raid a resistance safe house to get to us. You want them to come, Nadia realized. You want to force a confrontation. I want to face what I've done. Running feels cowardly. Running keeps you alive to fight another day. I've been alive for 23 years and accomplished nothing but building misery. Victor picked up the phone. Maybe it's time to stop running. Before Nadia or Maya could stop him, he powered on the device. It took a moment to connect, then exploded with notifications, hundreds of messages, missed calls, alerts. He scrolled through them, watching his former life disintegrate in real time. Whitmore, you've destroyed everything. Thousands will die because of what you've done. Justice Holloway, arrest warrants issued for you and the prisoner. Surrender immediately. Peters, his former assistant. Sir, I don't understand. Please explain. Please tell me there's a reason. And buried among the official communications, one from Dr. Chen, they arrested me. Worth it. Finish what we started. Victor felt his chest constrict. Chen had sacrificed everything to give them those extra minutes, and now faced the same system he'd helped Victor escape from. We need to make this count, Victor said. Chen risked his life. We can't let it be for nothing. What are you thinking? Maya asked. A press conference. Public, live-streamed, impossible to suppress. I'll take responsibility for everything I built, explain why it was wrong, and call for the immediate dissolution of the security apparatus. That's suicide. The government will arrest you the second you appear in public. Good. Let them arrest me on camera, in front of millions of witnesses. Let people see the system protecting itself by silencing dissent. It'll just prove everything we've exposed. Nadia stood. If you're doing a press conference, I'm doing it with you. This isn't just your redemption arc, it's our story. Father and daughter, finally together, dismantling the machine that tried to kill me. Nadia, they'll execute you. They were going to execute me anyway. At least this way, I go out making noise instead of dying quietly in a cell. She smiled fiercely. Besides, you don't get to have all the dramatic sacrifice moments. I'm Maria's daughter too. Fighting hopeless battles is apparently genetic. Maya shook her head. You're both insane. You know that, right? Probably, Victor admitted. But we're also right. And sometimes being right matters more than being safe. Fine. I'll set it up. There's a church in downtown Richmond. Pastor Williams has been sympathetic to the resistance. He'll let us use the space, and it's public enough that the government can't just disappear you without witnesses. Maya pulled out her phone. I can have it ready in 3 hours. That give you enough time to prepare what you want to say? Victor looked at Nadia. What do we want to say? The truth, she said simply. All of it. About the system, about us, about why fear isn't the same as safety. About how love is worth more than security. 3 hours later, Victor stood in front of Grace Baptist Church in downtown Richmond. News crews had assembled, not just mainstream media, but independent journalists, international correspondents, anyone who'd heard about the mysterious press conference being called by the fugitive former director of national integrity. Nadia stood beside him, wearing borrowed clothes from the safe house. They'd both cleaned up as best they could, but they still looked like what they were: exhausted, traumatized, but determined. Pastor Williams, a man in his 60s with kind eyes and graying hair, had opened his church without hesitation. Truth told in a house of God carries extra weight, he'd said. And Lord knows this country needs some truth. The cameras clicked on. Live streams went active. Victor could feel the weight of thousands, maybe millions of eyes on him. He stepped to the microphone. My name is Victor Kane. Until 4 hours ago, I was the director of national integrity, the architect of the surveillance state that has governed this nation for the past 2 decades. I'm here to tell you that everything I built was wrong. A murmur rippled through the assembled press. 23 years ago, my wife Maria was murdered and my infant daughter Isabella was kidnapped during the civil unrest that preceded the consolidation. I spent years searching for my daughter, and when every lead failed, when every hope died, I channeled my grief and rage into building a system that would prevent such tragedies. Or so I told myself. Victor paused, gathering strength. What I actually built was a monument to fear. A machine that treats every citizen as a potential threat, that criminalizes dissent, that operates detention facilities without oversight, that executes people without proper trials. I built a prison and convinced myself, convinced all of you, that it was safety. Nadia stepped forward. My name is Nadia Okafor. I am Isabella Kane, the daughter Victor just mentioned. 3 days ago, my father signed my execution order without knowing who I was. I was convicted of treason for trying to expose the truth about the security apparatus. My crime wasn't endangering national security, it was threatening the power structure that benefits from keeping you afraid. The crowd erupted with questions, but Nadia continued, her voice rising above the noise. I was stolen as an infant and raised under false identity. I spent my childhood not knowing my real parents, not knowing I had a father who was searching for me. When I finally learned the truth, I discovered that my father had become the very thing my mother spent her life fighting against, a system that values order over justice, security over humanity. Victor took over. The documents released today show the full extent of what we've done. Over 200 black site detention facilities. 40,000 people held without trial. Surveillance that monitors nearly every digital communication in this country. Execution orders signed with the same casual efficiency I used to sign expense reports. His voice broke. I thought I was preventing chaos. I thought I was protecting people. But all I did was industrialize tragedy, make suffering systematic instead of random. I created exactly what I feared most, a world where families are torn apart, where children lose parents to an unjust system, where fear governs every interaction. So what now? A journalist called out. You've exposed the system. What do you expect to happen? I expect to be arrested, Victor said simply. Probably today. Possibly in the next few minutes. General Whitmore and the security apparatus won't let this stand. They'll come for me, for my daughter, for anyone associated with these revelations. Then why do this? Why not stay hidden? Because hiding didn't change anything. Because my wife Maria believed that standing in the light, even when it's dangerous, is the only way to cast out darkness. Because, Victor's voice caught, because I want my daughter to know that her father finally chose right over easy. Nadia squeezed his hand. We're here to ask you, all of you, to demand better. To reject a system built on fear. To choose freedom over safety, complexity over certainty, humanity over order. It won't be comfortable. It won't be neat. There will be chaos, mistakes, failures. But at least we'll fail as free people instead of succeeding as prisoners. What about General Whitmore? Another journalist asked. He's calling you traitors, saying you've endangered millions of lives. General Whitmore is a good man who made the same mistake I did. He let trauma calcify into policy, Victor said. He believes in the system because the alternative feels like chaos. But believing something doesn't make it right. The security state doesn't keep you safe. It just keeps you compliant. A commotion at the back of the church drew everyone's attention. Armed soldiers were entering, tactical gear identifying them as federal security forces. General Whitmore walked through the door behind them, his face carved from stone. "Victor Kane and Nadia Okafor," he announced, his voice carrying through the church. "You're both under arrest for treason, espionage, and sedition against the unified states." The journalists surged forward, cameras capturing everything. Victor had been right. They couldn't disappear quietly now, not with the world watching. "I'll go peacefully," Victor said into the microphone before stepping away. "But I want everyone here to witness this. A father and daughter, arrested for telling the truth. This is what the security state looks like when it's threatened." The soldiers moved forward with zip ties. As they secured Victor's hands behind his back, he looked at Nadia. They were binding her too, roughly, treating her like a dangerous criminal instead of a young woman who'd survived impossible odds. "I'm proud of you," Victor said. "Maria would be proud of you." "She'd be proud of both of us," Nadia replied. Finally, Whitmore approached Victor directly. "You had everything. Power, respect, purpose. You threw it all away." "No," Victor said. "I found it all. I found my daughter. I found my conscience. I found the man Maria fell in love with before grief destroyed him. What I threw away was the costume I'd been wearing, pretending to be someone who mattered. You mattered. You saved this country. I imprisoned it. There's a difference." Victor looked at his former friend with something like pity. "I hope someday you'll understand that, Garrett. Before it's too late." They were led out of the church in full view of dozens of cameras. The footage would be everywhere within minutes. The architect of the security state, arrested alongside the daughter he tried to execute. The visual symbolism was perfect, devastating, exactly what they'd hoped for. As they pushed Victor into an armored transport vehicle, he caught a glimpse of the crowd that had gathered outside the church. Hundreds of people, maybe thousands, holding signs, chanting for freedom, for justice, for change. The machine was cracking. The detention facility they were taken to was one Victor had designed. Maximum security, isolated, built to hold the most dangerous threats to national security. The irony wasn't lost on him as they processed him through intake, taking biometric data, documenting everything with the efficiency he'd mandated. They separated him from Nadia immediately. He caught one last glimpse of her being led down a different corridor, her head still high, her spirit unbroken. Victor was placed in solitary confinement, a small cell with a concrete bed, a toilet, and nothing else. No windows, no communication, no contact with the outside world. It was designed to break prisoners psychologically, to make them feel erased from existence. He'd approved this design personally. Now he understood what it meant to be unmade by your own creation. Hours passed. Maybe days. It was impossible to tell without natural light or any way to mark time. Food appeared at irregular intervals, probably deliberately disorienting. The silence was absolute except for the occasional sound of boots in the corridor outside. Victor spent the time thinking about Maria. About the music box that played Brahms' lullaby. About her laugh, her passion, her unwavering belief that people deserved better than fear-based governance. He wondered if she could see him now, if wherever she was, she knew he'd finally chosen correctly. He hoped so. The cell door opened without warning. General Whitmore entered alone, looking older and more tired than Victor had ever seen him. "The government is collapsing," Whitmore said without preamble. 3 governors have called for independence from federal oversight. Congress is in chaos. The military is divided on whether to enforce martial law or stand down. Everything we built is falling apart. "Good," Victor said. "Good. Victor, people are dying. There are riots in 17 cities. The economy is in free fall. Foreign powers are positioning to take advantage of the instability. You wanted to prevent chaos, and you've created exactly that." "No. I created the conditions that made chaos inevitable. This is just the breaking point." Victor stood, his body stiff from days of confinement. "Systems built on lies don't fail quietly, Garrett. They collapse violently because there's no legitimate foundation to rebuild from. If I'd done the right thing 20 years ago, If we'd built actual justice instead of security theater, we wouldn't be here. So what do you want? You've destroyed everything. Are you satisfied? I want you to let Nadia go. Whitmore laughed bitterly. Why would I do that? Because executing her now just proves everything we said. Because she's not a threat, she's a witness. Because somewhere underneath the general, you're still the man who helped me search for my daughter all those years ago. The one who believed family mattered. Family doesn't matter more than national security. Yes, it does. Victor moved closer to the bars separating them. That's the lie we told ourselves, Garrett. That abstract concepts like national security or order or stability matter more than individual human beings. But they don't. Every system, every law, every structure, they're all meaningless if they don't serve the actual people they're supposed to protect. Whitmore was silent for a long moment. They're going to execute you. Both of you. Show trials, probably, to demonstrate that betraying the state has consequences. Make examples of you to discourage others. I know. I designed that protocol too. Victor felt a strange peace settling over him. But here's what you need to understand. It won't work. Martyrs are more dangerous than dissidents. Every execution just proves the system is corrupt. You can't kill your way back to stability. Then what would you have me do? Step down. You and Justice Holloway and everyone else who built this with me. Take responsibility, advocate for transition to actual democracy, and let the country figure out what comes next without us poisoning the well. That's suicide. Political, if not literal. Probably. But it's the right thing to do. And sometimes that has to be enough. Whitmore studied him through the bars. Maria really did a number on you, didn't she? Even dead, she's still making you believe in impossible ideals. She gave me a daughter who carries those ideals. That's worth more than any empire I could have built. The general turned to leave, then paused at the door. For what it's worth, Victor, I think she'd be proud of you. The man you've become, not the man you were. Then it was all worth it. Whitmore left. Victor sat back down on the concrete bed and waited for whatever came next. It came 3 days later. The cell door opened and soldiers escorted him to a courtroom, not a tribunal chamber, but an actual courtroom with judges, a jury, spectators. The government had decided to give him a real trial, probably calculating that a legitimate legal process would look better than a tribunal execution. They were wrong about that. A real trial meant real evidence, real cross-examination, real opportunity to expose everything. Nadia was already there, sitting at the defendant's table beside him. She looked thin, pale, but her eyes were fierce. They'd kept her in solitary too, trying to break her spirit. They'd failed. The trial lasted 2 weeks. Victor and Nadia didn't deny any charges: treason, sedition, espionage, betrayal of state secrets. They admitted to everything, then used their testimony to expose why they'd done it. Victor walked the jury through every policy he'd implemented, every detention center he'd authorized, every execution order he'd signed. He showed them the mechanics of the surveillance state, explained how it operated, detailed how many lives had been destroyed in the name of security. Nadia described her own experience: stolen as a child, raised in lies, discovering her father had become a symbol of oppression. She detailed the resistance networks, not to betray them but to show why they existed. She read from the leaked documents, forcing the court to confront the reality of what had been done in their name. The prosecution tried to argue national security. Victor's attorney, a brave woman named Jamila Roberts who'd volunteered despite the personal risk, systematically dismantled every justification. The jury deliberated for 8 hours. They came back with a verdict: guilty on all counts. The judge, a new appointee, not part of the old tribunal system, prepared to deliver sentencing. Victor stood to receive it, Nadia beside him, their hands clasped together. Victor Kane and Nadia Okafor, the judge said, you have been found guilty of crimes against the state. However, she paused, and something in her expression shifted. This court recognizes that you have also exposed crimes by the state. Crimes that this judiciary system can no longer ignore or excuse. A murmur rippled through the courtroom. Therefore, while I must impose sentences as the law requires, I am also recommending immediate commutation based on extraordinary circumstances. You will serve 6 months in minimum security facility, after which you will be released on probation pending the outcome of the congressional investigation into security apparatus abuses. Victor felt his knees weaken. 6 months. Not execution. Not life imprisonment. 6 months, and then freedom. Furthermore, the judge continued, I am ordering the immediate release of all individuals held in detention facilities without formal charges or trial. The surveillance programs detailed in the leaked documents are hereby suspended pending full review. And I am calling for the establishment of a Truth and Reconciliation Commission to examine the past 20 years of security policy. She looked directly at Victor and Nadia. What you did was illegal. But it was also necessary. Sometimes the law itself becomes unjust, and breaking it becomes the only moral choice. This court cannot condone your methods, but it can acknowledge your purpose. 6 months. Then you're free to help rebuild what was broken. The courtroom erupted into chaos. Cheers from some, protests from others. Victor barely heard any of it. He turned to Nadia, and she was crying, and so was he, and they held each other while the world rearranged itself around them. We did it, Nadia whispered. We actually did it. We survived, Victor replied. And we get to keep surviving. Together. 6 months later. Victor sat on the porch of a small house in Baltimore, watching the sun set over the city where he'd once lived with Maria. The house wasn't the same one that had been destroyed during the riots, but it was close, in the same neighborhood, and somehow that mattered. Nadia was inside, making dinner. She'd moved in with him after their release, neither of them ready to be separated again. They were still teaching each other, still figuring out how to be father and daughter after 23 years apart, but they were doing it. One day at a time. The security apparatus had indeed collapsed, just as Victor had predicted. General Whitmore had resigned and was cooperating with the congressional investigation. Justice Holloway had stepped down. The tribunal system had been dissolved entirely, replaced with actual courts and due process. It wasn't perfect. There was still chaos, still violence, still people who believed the security state should be restored. But there was also hope, and freedom, and the possibility of something better. Dr. Chen had been released and cleared of all charges. He'd visited last week, bringing wine and stories about his new position advising the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. He and Victor had talked late into the night about what they'd built and what needed to replace it. Maya from the Resistance had stopped by too, along with Pastor Williams. They were working on a coalition to help people transition out of the surveillance state mentality, teaching citizens how to trust again after decades of fear. Victor's phone rang, an actual phone call, not a monitored security line. He looked at the screen. Peters, his former assistant. Hello, Peters. Sir, I mean, Victor. Sorry, I'm still not used to calling you that. I just wanted to let you know the last of the black site facilities was shut down today. Everyone's been released or transferred to legitimate correctional facilities with proper oversight. That's good news. It is. And Sir, Victor, I wanted to say thank you. For what you did. I was angry at first, felt betrayed, but watching everything unfold, seeing what we'd been part of. I'm glad you had the courage to stop it. I'm sorry it took me so long to find that courage. Better late than never. Peters paused. Take care of yourself. And tell Nadia I said hello. Victor hung up and looked at the sunset. Orange and pink streaked across the sky, painting the city in colors that felt like hope. Nadia came out carrying 2 plates of pasta. Dinner's ready. I tried Maria's recipe, the one you told me about. No guarantees it's edible. They sat together on the porch, eating pasta that was actually pretty good, watching the city transform from day to night. Somewhere in the neighborhood, children were playing. A few houses down, music drifted from an open window. Life, messy and chaotic and beautiful. Do you think she'd forgive me? Victor asked quietly. For taking so long to get here. Maria. Nadia set down her fork. Dad, she loved you. Love doesn't keep score of how long it takes someone to find their way home. It just celebrates when they arrive. I wish I could tell her I'm sorry. For everything I became after losing her. Maybe you can. Not directly, but, Nadia gestured to the neighborhood, the city, the world beyond. Every person released from those facilities, every surveillance program shut down, every family reunited, that's you telling her you're sorry. That's you honoring what she believed in. Victor felt tears track down his face. He didn't bother wiping them away anymore. He'd spent 23 years not crying, not feeling, not allowing himself to be human. He was done with that. "Thank you," he said. "For what?" "For surviving. For being brave enough to fight. For giving me a chance to be your father." Victor took her hand. "For teaching me that it's never too late to choose differently." Nadia squeezed his hand. "We taught each other. That's how family works." They sat in comfortable silence as stars began appearing in the darkening sky. Victor thought about Maria, about the music box, about all the years he'd spent building monuments to loss instead of opening himself to love. But he was here now. With his daughter. In a city slowly healing from decades of fear. He'd ordered her death. She was his lost daughter. And together, they'd found redemption in the ruins of everything he'd built. It wasn't the ending he'd imagined 23 years ago when Maria died and Isabella disappeared. It wasn't neat or perfect or without ongoing struggle. But it was real. And it was enough. Somewhere in the universe, Victor hoped Maria was watching. Hoped she could see that the man she'd loved had finally found his way back from the darkness. Hoped she knew that their daughter, brilliant, fierce, unbreakable Isabella, had saved him just as completely as he'd failed to save her all those years ago. The music box melody played in his memory. Brahms' lullaby, winding through the years, calling him home. He was finally listening. 3 years later, the congressional testimony chamber was packed with spectators, journalists, and former detainees. Victor sat at the witness table, now serving as the lead consultant for the National Justice Reform Commission. Nadia sat in the front row, taking notes for the book. They were writing together, a memoir about the security state, its collapse, and the long work of building something better. The committee chair, a woman named Senator Elizabeth Martinez, leaned into her microphone. "Mr. Kane, you've been working with this commission for 3 years now. In your assessment, are we succeeding in rebuilding a more just system?" Victor considered the question carefully. "We're trying. We're making mistakes, lots of them. We're moving slowly, arguing constantly, facing resistance from people who want the security state back. But we're doing it in the light, with accountability, with the voices of people who are harmed by the old system." "And your daughter?" Ms. Okafor has become quite the advocate for civil liberties reform. Victor smiled. "She's her mother's daughter. Maria would be proud of the work Nadia's doing, fighting for the marginalized, demanding justice, refusing to accept easy answers." "And you? How do you live with what you built?" It was the question Victor asked himself every day. "I don't get to live with it comfortably. Every person I meet who lost someone to the detention system, every family torn apart by policies I implemented, they're reminders of what I did. I can't undo that. All I can do is spend whatever time I have left trying to build something better." "Is that enough?" "No. But it's what I have." Victor looked at Nadia, who smiled at him. "That, and a daughter who reminds me every day that redemption isn't about erasing the past. It's about choosing differently in every moment you have left." Senator Martinez nodded. "Thank you, Mr. Kane. This commission recognizes your ongoing contributions to justice reform." Hearing adjourned. As people filed out, Nadia joined Victor at the table. "Not bad. You're getting better at these testimonies. 3 years of practice. 3 years of second chances." She linked her arm through his. "Come on. We've got that meeting with the former detainees coalition in an hour." They walked out of the Capitol building together, father and daughter, architect and resistor, 2 people who'd found each other in the ruins and decided to build something worth keeping. The afternoon sun felt warm on Victor's face. He thought of Maria, as he did every day, and imagined her walking beside them. Not as a ghost, but as a presence, in Nadia's fierce advocacy, in his own faltering attempts at justice, in the slow, painful, necessary work of healing a broken nation. He'd ordered her death. She was his lost daughter. And together, they discovered that the hardest work isn't building empires or maintaining order. It's learning to be human again after forgetting how. It's choosing love over fear, every single day, even when fear feels safer. It's believing that broken things, people, systems, nations, can be healed if we're brave enough to admit they're broken in the first place. Victor Kane had spent 23 years running from that truth. Now he spent every day running toward it. And his daughter ran beside him, lighting the way home. What would you sacrifice to save someone you love? And what would you build from the ruins of your greatest mistakes? Leave your thoughts below. Your story matters too. Thanks for experiencing this journey with me. If this story touched your heart, please share it with someone who needs to hear it.